I always go through this process of like creating something, feeling excited about it, doing lots of really heavy edits, and I eventually get to the point where I'm sick of it because I've heard it so many times, and then there's some phase of doubt.
This is Champagne is Also a Band podcast. One songwriter, one song. I'm Sven, your host for a journey into the music of Champaign-Urbana. Recorded in the Blue Box studio with a songwriter from the Champaign-Urbana music scene, past or present. Champagne is Also a Band podcast is proud to be a part of the Champagne Showers Podcast Network. Welcome to Champagne is Also a Band podcast. Today I have John Mcnally, and you may know John Mcnally from his project TwoLeggedZoo. Did I say that right? I'm always like, is it TwoLeggedZoo?
No, you got it. You got it.
Part of my choir upbringing is to be like, and it was legged. But I appreciate you being on the show, and shout out to Matt Harsh for letting us record in the Labary. Today we're going to be listening to your song Rest 1. And so, without further ado, let's listen to the song. Welcome back. So, John, usually I like to ask what came first, the music or the lyrics, but since this is an instrumental piece, I think it's appropriate to say what came first. Was it the concept or was it the music?
It was the concept, and this was a piece that was intentionally written for an installation that Matt Harsh and I did at Cranard Art Museum called Rest Lab, and they're still doing episodes of Rest Lab, so I was exploring the concept of rest musically, and this track has gone through a number of transformations, and the version that was just released was spurred because I had my show in Huntsville, Alabama, opening for Tipper, and I needed more songs because I didn't have enough songs finished, and I was like, oh yeah, it's time to get this out into the world. So I took some of the new skills that I learned, and I added a lot more stuff to it, and brought it out.
When you start constructing a song, a piece, what do you usually start with? Is it like a beat, a rhythm, something? I'm curious about your process in terms of how do you put together a musical piece?
Well, sometimes it starts with kind of a vague-ish idea, and because Ableton Live, which is the software that I use to both write and perform with, is just so vast and powerful, and there's infinite possibilities that can come from it, a lot of times I just start experimenting, and then I just end up sort of following various rabbit trails, while keeping sort of a central idea, and it's kind of very intuitive about, in the moment, does this feel right? Does this add to it, or does it take away from it, or is this taking it in a different direction? But to be honest, I don't oftentimes, pretty much never, have a clear vision of what the song is going to be from the get-go. I'm not like a composer that starts out and says yes, I know every part that I'm going to bring to life here, and I know exactly how I'm going to do it. I always kind of feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and things just sort of come together in a way. I don't know.
I had a sense, at least with this piece, and since we're talking specifically about this piece, it's I try to isolate myself from what your other pieces function as, but sometimes I feel like you're making choices of I want to run these concepts until not until, but before they become stale, and then introduce new elements. And within those initial parts, you kind of explore the kind of opportunities within those sections. Did that make sense? I don't know. Sometimes I pull stuff from an abstract and then try to make it concrete, and it gets a little weird. That's
actually kind of definitely how I do it, because there's the one chord progression that anchors the whole thing throughout it, but it's just different voices and timbres. You've got the bells part in the beginning is the same chord progression as the choir and the strings portion of it, but just instead of it being choir and strings, it's arpeggiated bells. And then all those sounds are just different nature sounds that I did some really, really heavy processing on, all the the textural sounds.
Yeah.
I kind of really like the concept of, because I'm trying to make calm music that could be used for relaxation or for doing internal work or for healing, that you have something to anchor to, because when you have the same chord progression that happens over and over again, your mind anticipates what's going to come next, because you sort of lock into that. It's there's no real sudden changes, and it just sort of gradually evolves over time into this sort of sprawling piece, but you're always sort of anchored by that.
I was thinking about the chord progression, but it doesn't sink into my head that it was the same chord progression. But I got that progression when 2 minutes you start kind of fleshing out those bells, and I pictured them kind of as a beat in some ways also, but it's interesting to think of them as being kind of denatured nature sounds, right? So it's 2 minutes in, you start drawing out the notes. Before, the notes were a little bit shorter and more punctuated, and then they start kind of bleeding and having more of that, they ring out. I'm kind of curious how you, within I guess even to, let me back up a little bit. I meant to ask is, so when this premiered, had this been thought out or performed or like put into Ableton, or were you going to kind of do this on the fly?
No, it was all like really well thought out ahead of time, and then I sent it off to get professionally mixed and mastered. But
Okay.
I really like having things sort of flow into each other seamlessly, so that's why I'm really big on like carefully EQing and like fading stuff out with really long fades while you bring new elements in. So it just feels as cohesive as possible. So it's like even though you're kind of moving on to the next part, you still feel like it's all still flowing together. It doesn't feel like there's an A section and a B section.
I mean, in some ways, I feel like you have an addition of elements, and then as those elements become more prominent, you kind of drop out the other elements, which is in a way that you're saying that you start off with having a fade on something, but then you have a fade in of something else that accentuates or transitions into a different section, even though it's kind of a reiteration of what you already laid out in the chord pattern. Yeah. How do you think about your music? I feel like you've made mention of it kind of a meditative, or even kind of, it falls within kind of the ambient sounds. How was this piece going to function within the context of this rest lab?
Well, I kind of compose individual pieces, but when I perform, I like it to all flow together as one. So I'm thinking about that when I write tracks. You know, I'm thinking about what key signature I pick, which is pretty much always C major because it's all whole steps. So it sounds really happy because I'm trying to make happy sounding music. And a lot of that is a reflection of where I feel like we are collectively with being very overstimulated, where we've got information beaming into our brains constantly. There's a lot of darkness in the world, and I want to create some music that can help people relax, help people feel joy, maybe be a catalyst for some healing in some way. Like to me, knowing that my music helped someone through a dark time or through some sort of period of growth is like the ultimate success to me. Like that is more meaningful to me than like any amount of plays on Spotify. If one person told me, I heard your song and I was going through something and it really helped me, that is like the highest compliment I could ever get on my music. So I kind of think about how I'm making it. My music is both like an exploration of sound and like sound combination and crafting, but like with that intention in so many ways.
I was thinking about when I was listening to this, you know, I didn't think about it in terms of being in context of the Rest Lab. I thought about just the title and of rest. And I thought about how this piece ended up being constructed. And I want to say, as the sections unfolded, I want to say, really hit me as if I were to lay down and say, okay, I'm going to sleep. I need to rest. I felt like those first 2 minutes, you know, the very punctuated sounds and rhythms, I almost equated it with that chaos that you have when you are trying to sleep, but your brain is still going and going and going and going. And then as you kind of try to resolve and get through that part where your brain is so active, and then when the lengthening of the notes or kind of this calming of the sea in a way, and then you get to where you start using more pads of the harmonies and the chords become more clear. And so like right around minute 3, there's a spot where it just becomes more about the chords just ringing out, and it's just kind of that calm on the sea, and it's like your brain's getting ready to like go unconscious. As that was what was going in my head, and I did get a little sleepy too. I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I mean, it feels like it's succeeding in that regard. I'm kind of curious about how you thought about these sections and then brought them into this concept. What particularly was going on, or what was planned to go on in these Rest Lab sessions that this piece was played? against?
Well, the first version of Rest Lab, when this song was debuted, it was much simpler. It was like kind of closer to those middle chord progression sessions, and I just had lots of layers, and I would sort of slowly build it up, fading in and out different elements, because that's kind of how I first started to solidify my sound for what it's become now. And the concept for that, we just wanted to create space for people to come and collectively sort of relax. But a part of it also comes from, like, to me, a version of rest doesn't always necessarily entail sleep. Sometimes it can entail stillness, like just sort of forcing that on yourself. Like, I really love laying down in my bed with headphones on and entering that sort of in-between space between like sleep and consciousness and sort of drifting in that realm, you know? So like, to me, that is also rest. Rest also doesn't just entail sleeping per se. Like, it could also be just slowing down for a little bit and maybe entering that realm.
I kind of had a thought of like, of active restfulness, of being that very mindful, focusing on, you know, in a way of resting, but also confronting the things that you think about every day in a weird way. I don't know. Maybe, again, my interpretation of your piece probably says more about me than it does about you. But because I think about that a lot, where it's just like, how do I find that peace? And then sometimes it's like, you can't just ignore the things that you're dealing with. You have to confront them in your own space and work through them. Yeah.
It's hard to find the time to do that a lot because we're continuously busy, and so I feel like a lot of compartmentalization happens, you know?
Yeah.
It's like hard to make time to process your feelings about things, and eventually you're sort of confronted with it one way or the other.
You already have this kind of in the digital realm, like everything is there. How did you, I always want to call it solidify it, but how did you finally bring it together into the form that people hear on Spotify? Like, how did it, this is really more of the mechanics of your DAW. Like, how did you convert it into those sounds so that we have a WAV file or we have a MP3 in the end?
Well, I mean, a big thing about working in a DAW and electronic music is learning when to let go because of the infinite possibilities. So at some point you just have to say, I need to let this go. Somebody in a Discord group that I'm on told me, don't polish the face off of it. And that resonated with me like really, really deeply. So I've been trying to be a lot better about just letting it go, because I could easily open the session back up and start making like tweaks and tweaks and tweaks and changes here and there, and then never end up feeling like I'm finished with it. But like saying I'm done with it and saying like, this is it, and I'm moving on. I always go through this process of like creating something, feeling excited about it, doing lots of really heavy edits, and I eventually get to the point where I'm sick of it because I've heard it so many times, and then there's some phase of doubt about it, and usually when I reach that doubting phase, I'm like, okay, it's time to shelf this. It's time to walk away for a little while, work on something different, and I can come back to this in a little while when it's fresh again. And there's been a number of tracks that I like kind of hated at some point, and then I've like realized, no, don't trash it. Don't throw it away forever. Just let it rest for a little while and then come back to it and try again. So because I had a deadline, I was just saying to myself like, well, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And like, I really force myself to make those decisions when I have the deadline. And then I'll just say like, all right, this is what you get. It's no longer like this abstract infinite process. It's like, no, I have to have this done because I have to get it sent off for mix and master, and I have to play the show on this day. So that is kind of the catalyst for how I get it out the door in so many ways.
One of my questions, and I think we've touched on it in different ways, is that I just wrote like, how do you know when to switch? But I think in some ways you've kind of answered that. So I'll kind of leave that. I wanted to kind of go into some of my own thoughts. I had mentioned this earlier about how it reminded me of the chaotic thoughts that you have at the beginning. And then as you're coming to terms with your day, I'm still going from the trying to fall asleep perspective, but I had this sense of that there was the first half is all about like kind of letting go of the world, and then kind of the last half is kind of acceptance of the world, kind of like I'm getting my piece. I was curious about how at the end you had kind of those beats returning. In my mind, they were reminiscent of the beats that were happening at the beginning.
Yeah.
Did you happen to like just reverse what was going on before, or I'm just curious how you put those in?
I just brought them back in.
Okay.
It's the same part, but I just brought that back in at the end because I feel like, okay, after like the strings and the choir sort of fades out, like we can loop back around to this. A lot of that came from thinking about how it's going to fit into the bigger context of live performances, because I really enjoy playing live, even though like I feel a little awkward doing it in a lot of ways still, because I'm not really doing a whole lot on stage. It was all done in the studio, so it's just like me and my MIDI controller, and I'm just like sort of mixing between these ambient tracks. So it's not really like a whole lot to see, like as far as in terms of my performance, you know? Yeah.
I was thinking about the performance you did with I Am Lost Too.
Yeah.
I'm curious, I know that this isn't part of that song, but I never got a chance to talk to you about how that collaboration happened and like how that
it was super impulsive. I sent Leslie a message like a couple days before Sven stock, and I'm like, hey, I'm playing, you're playing, you want to do something together? And he was like, yeah, send me some tracks. So I sent him a couple of them, and he picked that one, which I just called Rainy Piano, and he's like, and then he just sort of like came up with some lyrics. He told me he doesn't like to freestyle much, so he like needed a little bit of time to write some lyrics for it, and he did, and then it just kind of happened. As
an organizer, I try to keep my surprises to a minimum if I can, but that was a really pleasant surprise because it worked. And I really hope, Leslie, if you're listening, that perhaps you two can collaborate some more on some work, because I think that was really successful.
Yeah, I really enjoyed what all the elements that he added to it, and I didn't know what he was going to do before he did it, which to me was really exciting. And I'm very cautious about collaboration. Sometimes people will reach out to collaborate with me, and I'm not at all opposed to the idea, but I like to be really honest with people, and a lot of it comes down to respecting their time too, because of how my process is. I'm not able to practice consistently with people, and I also have like a lot of things that I'm working on myself, so like adding more to it isn't necessarily like really possible for me. But I don't know, that sort of sporadic collaboration just felt right in the moment. It just seemed like a good idea at the time. It
was a successful premiere, if you will. Yeah. So I was going to mention my favorite part in the song, and one of the things that really, stuck out with me is you don't really have a super rich bass line until like 4 minutes into it. And I just feel like, and it's not like a thumping bass or anything like that. It's a very calming and warm bass, kind of like you're wrapping yourself up in a blanket kind of thing. And to me, that was the release, like that was the spot where it was just like, okay, my brain just kind of let go and just be absorbed in the sound. Yeah. And so for me, that was my favorite part in this piece. So I'm curious what your favorite part in the piece is.
My favorite part is the beginning with the bells and the weird textural sounds. I'm just super happy about how that turned out. And that bass came to be because I was going to be playing on like a big system, and I was like, well, I can't play on a Function 1 Vero rig and not have some subs. So they're like, there has to be sub bass in this, because initially when I wrote the album, I wrote it for small speakers in small rooms, because like that's how I figured people were going to listen to it. So I didn't put a lot of bass in the album. And then after I got that show, I was booked for that show, I was like, well, like the music needs bass. Otherwise, it's just not going to sound right, like playing out of a big sound system. I also initially wrote a lot of the tracks to be like pretty mono compatible so that they would sound good on a Bluetooth speaker, because I just thought to myself, like, how are most people going to listen to this? Like headphones, Bluetooth speakers, small spaces, small speakers. Like, okay, that's how I will tailor the way that it's going to be written. So, and then I like had to go back and revise that, which was great. I was like really happy to add more panning and space and deep bass and stuff to it, because it seemed a lot more full and rich that way.
So, of course, my final question is, why did you pick this song to be the one you wanted to talk about today?
I think it's just because I love it and I'm really proud of it, and I want to share it with people.
Champaign is Also a Band podcast is proud to support Jubilee Cafe. Jubilee Cafe is a free weekly meal program at Community United Church of Christ, 805 South 6th Street in Champaign, Illinois. Jubilee Cafe serves a home-cooked meal from 5 to 6:30 each Monday. Their mission is to feed hungry people by cooking healthy, delicious meals and by serving their guests restaurant-style with servers waiting on tables. Jubilee Cafe is open to anyone who cares to eat with them. Because food insecurity among students is so high, they serve students as well as others in and around the Champaign-Urbana community who struggle with hunger. Meals are free to all and will be served each Monday evening, located in the accessible lower level of the building at 6th and Daniel Streets in Champaign. For more information on the meal or how to volunteer, go to the Jubilee Cafe CUCC Facebook page or email them at jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. That's jubilee.cafe@community-ucc.org. Welcome back. So, John, what is your favorite Champaign-Urbana venue?
Gallery Art Bar, without a doubt, because of how it all came to be. It's just, I mean, it was Jonah's vision, for sure. I think that my interpretation of it is that that vision came to life from the Soundscapes shows and the Luma City shows that Jonah and Matt Harsh and Jake Metz and I were all doing together, and Jonah had the building and the resources and the vision to bring it to life. And yeah, I love that spot. It's great.
It's been an interesting journey in terms of, you know, it goes from Blackbird to Nola's to Gallery Art Bar. It's just one of those things that I feel like Champaign has needed for a long time, kind of the blending or even the blurring of music and visuals at the same time, because I don't think there's a lot of places that allow for that type of interaction. I feel like they've done a really good job of encouraging, you know, big name acts, or not even big, or more well-known acts.
I like to use the terms established and emerging artists. So like emerging artists is like you're still building your following, you're still finding your sound, you're still, you know, on your growth journey. And I would call an established artist someone who's, you know, got a pretty big catalog and they pretty much settled into their sound and they have some level of following or fan base.
Not to call anybody out, but I guess that's exactly what it is. But what emerging artists are you excited about these days that you might have seen? If that's not an easy question, then we can skip that. But I was just curious.
Yeah, that's not an easy question. Like locally, Champaign or
Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Oh man, I almost struggle to call them emerging, but I would say the whole Darker Than Blue collective, DJ collective, is really awesome. But I can't really call them emerging though, because they've all been doing it for a while. But those guys are great.
Maybe more in terms of emerging, it's not even just, maybe it's that they're just beginning to get recognized for the work that they've been doing all along.
Yeah, I feel like that would be accurate for the Darker Than Blue collective, because they seem to be doing really well with the recognition that they're getting. I love watching Nate Wells mix records because it's a wild journey. You never know where he's going to take you. It's like you could be playing a B-52 song 1 minute and then like a crazy noise song the next minute. It's just, he goes some places. Scarecrow Adams is awesome. He's a very inspiring musician. I love Luke Burkheader's solo work, and I also love his band projects. I wouldn't mind speaking to how the Champaign scene has nurtured me as a whole.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
So I moved down here in like kind of late, no, it was about 2013, and I got a job at Common Ground Food Co-op in 2014. And then there's a bunch of musicians that work in the kitchen up there where I worked. So that sort of allowed me to begin to plug into the scene, and Isaac Arms booked me to play a show at Mike and Molly's, and that was really cool because before then I was just playing like kind of DIY shows, which I love playing DIY shows. I've played a ton of basements and like living rooms and stuff like that. But after I moved here, I kind of really started to work on producing my own stuff. I kind of transitioned from being like a house electro dubstep DJ to like making my own music. And at some point I decided like, I'm just going to play my own music live. Like I'm going to stop doing the DJ thing. Nothing against DJs. Like DJs are great, but I just decided like that's what I'm going to do. And I stuck with it. And I feel like having opportunities to play shows of like weird music that doesn't quite fit into any one specific genre was like very nurturing for me, and like having people that were supportive of it, even if it wasn't like a ton of people, but it was like enough people, was really encouraging. And I also feel like getting connected with people like Matt Harsh and Jake Metz and Kevin Miller, DJ Belly, was super helpful because that allowed me to sort of plug into the larger scene, and we would pool our energy and our money and our resources to do crazy things like Immersion Festival or immersive art installations for Boneyard Arts Festival and stuff like that, which where I grew up in Kankakee, that would never be possible for me. Like that, like I would have never been able to blossom as a musician in Kankakee in the same way that I did here, because there's just outlets for creativity here that didn't exist where I was before.
Tell me a little bit about your involvement with the Immersion Festival and like how that came about.
I'm one of the co-founders of Immersion Festival, but it is very much a collaborative effort. I am like hesitant to take too much credit for it because so like it started in 2019. Jake Metz and I have been talking about doing a sound dome for a while because was really into like multi-channel spatial audio, and he introduced me to the concept and like kind of taught me how to do it. And I just called him up one day when I was on break from work, and I was like, hey, do you want to do the Sound Dome thing? And then we applied for an Urbana Arts grant, and we got it. And then we did the first immersion in 2019 at the IMC, and we built a geodesic dome, and we attached 16 speakers to it. I think it was 16. Jake might be yelling if he's listening right now. And we just kind of did it. We were like flying by the seat of our pants and just sort of making it happen. And like Matt Harsh came and he did projected visuals, and we had a bunch of painters come, and then people to just like bring your weird art that you're not going to be able to come do anywhere else. And we're going to give you a platform to do it. And it doesn't matter how many tickets you sell. It doesn't matter how many drinks you sell. Like if we like it, and we're going to give you a slot to perform at the festival to come do your thing. Cause it's like something that I would always dream of having, you know, right. And now that I was in a position to do something like that, I would want to do it for other people too.
I think that kind of what I think is really interesting about that is that it's not necessarily immersing yourself in sound. It's immersing yourself in other people's, I don't know, lesser known works. Yeah. I want to say like you're exposing and immersing people in these different
And the visuals played a really heavy element in that too, because both Jake and Matt are visual artists too, as in like projected video artists. Yeah. So it's kind of more about creating like a mind-opening experience in a way of like seeing what could potentially be possible, you know, that you'd never thought of before.
I mean, you've described some elements of what makes a good music scene or a good music community, but if you were to like put it down and say these are the things that make a good music community, what would you say?
Venues to perform at, people to support those venues, and musicians or artists to create the art, and then people who just want to enjoy it, and an atmosphere that is more collaborative than competition based. You know, like mutual support and aid, I think mutual support makes a good scene when people support each other. And like, I feel like the Champaign-Urbana scene is very much that way. I feel like, you know, you'll go to a show and it'll be like maybe half the crowd or some portion of the crowd, there'll be musicians who are like excited to see you play. And then you go to their shows and it's coming from a place of love. That's kind of how I feel about it. Anything you think that Champaign-Urbana could do better? I think that Champaign-Urbana's art scene could do better by finding more ways to connect with people that are outside of the scene to sort of bring them in, if that's something that they're interested in. Because it does feel like a lot of times when I go to shows, it's like a lot of the same people. But I also feel, in a lot of ways, kind of out of touch with the Champaign-Urbana scene at the moment because of my family obligations. I'm not able to go to as many shows as I want to. I guess that comes with being a parent, is you feel like you're pulled in two different directions because, you know, like your weekend comes and it's like, well, I've been at work all week and I want to spend time with my kids, but I also want to go spend time with my friends and like go see live music. So it's always like a push-pull relationship between those things. Yeah.
Champaign is also a Band podcast is proud to support Exile on Main Street. Exile on Main Street, located in the old train station building at 100 North Chestnut Street in downtown Champaign, has been helping to build record collections since 2004. Carrying a wide array of new and used LPs, CDs, and video games. Exile on Main Street has something for just about any music enthusiast and old-school gaming devotee. Exile also hosts regular free live music shows on its stage, so be sure to check out their Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for the up-to-date details on the next upcoming event. Open 7 days a week, they can be reached by phone at 217-398-MAIN. That's 217-398-6246. Welcome back. So, John, what is your favorite non-musical thing or things?
Going on hikes with my kids at some of the beautiful nature spaces in Vermilion County. Danville, I'll never love Danville, but I've made peace with the place that I live, and the one really positive thing I can say about Vermilion County is there are some absolutely gorgeous nature areas there. To anyone who's listening, go check out Forest Glen and Kennecook.
Yeah. Is Kickapoo still in there?
Yeah, Kickapoo is in there. But everyone in Champaign knows about Kickapoo, and that's where they all go. They never. So that's why I was plugging the Kennecook is right up the road from Kickapoo.
Yeah, and then like, is that adjacent to like Middle Fork too?
It's on the Middle Fork River. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and then the Middle Fork Park. That's in Champaign County.
Oh. Yes. Oh, okay. So
But they're close.
We're really close, but it's just one is on one side, one is on the other. Okay. Cool. But do you have a favorite that you like to go to, or
Kennecook?
Kennecook? Yeah,
Kennecook or Forest Glen, because Forest Glen has like a beach climax forest, and they also have just like really gorgeous forests there that are really well established. I think never been plowed Or I mean, never, like, it's not a restoration project. It's like an original old growth forest, which is super rare.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess that kind of goes slightly, I'm going to take this into a tangent about what you do on a day-to-day basis, with trying to help establish more permaculture in the land of corn and beans. I feel like people aren't necessarily thinking about land usage.
Yeah.
And it kind of goes hand in hand with how you have old growth, and how do you get or return some of those lands back to our agricultural choices may feed people, but it's not necessarily the best choices for...
No one eats that.
Oh, that's right. Right. Oh, sorry.
Nobody eats the corn and beans that we grow.
That's right.
It's your food's food, and it's for like food, processing.
Yeah.
For
my bad.
Making. Yeah. No, it's fine.
Because I guess I was thinking about it in kind of the string of things rather than...
Totally. Yeah. I mean, eventually it is converted into food, but...
And then it's converted into Frito-Lays, right?
Yeah, exactly. Or oil. Lots of various oils. Or that's a pretty deep rabbit hole we could go down. I work in conservation, so I help farmers put conservation practices on their land to do less damage to the environment, like pollinator habitat, or habitat for wild birds, or edge of field practices to reduce fertilizer and pesticide getting in the water, or erosion management practices. I have a deep love and appreciation for the natural world, and the more that I've learned about ecology, the harder it is for me to reconcile what we're doing with our land in Illinois. Especially when you take into consideration that 0.01% of the prairie state is still unplowed native prairie, and the only reason it exists is because it's in pioneer cemeteries.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize that it was that...
small.
Well, I wanted to say dire, but...
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, but, I mean, Mother Nature is really good at repairing herself, but this is a tangent, it's a rabbit hole, but it's okay. We're stuck between this idea of like, how do we feed ourselves, and how do we do that with a really small workforce? Because when you think about the fact that like maybe 5 people can farm like 1,500 acres, that's just insane to think about.
Right.
But that also makes it so that you have to be reliant on tools that are not going to be that great for the environment.
I'm kind of yes-anding this a little bit because, I think about the way that everything, when you say tools, everything seems that it's set up to just produce corn and beans. There's not equipment that is specifically, should I say, readily available that would help people plant more permaculture type things. It's available, but it's not.
Yeah, the markets just aren't developed for it yet. It's, I think a lot of it has to do with how agriculture is subsidized, and it's subsidized for big grain commodity production, and we export a lot of that, and so there is an incentive to produce a lot of that.
It's kind of a dark rabbit hole to go down because, the more I think about it, I mean, honestly, when I first moved out to Sedoras, it's like, oh, we're around, all this growth and all these green things. And then when you realize like some of the chemicals that are being used that are, what is that? Some of the drift that happens and what it does to maybe our trees and growth, it's been pretty eye-opening. But I appreciate the work that you're doing in order to make sure that people are aware, because I think, it's the industry is set up to be focused on those corn and beans. It's
a very extractive industry, and the farmers aren't exactly winning. It's people further up the food chain that profit from making these commodities, that are producing these commodities in a subsidized way, where because it's subsidized, like it costs more to produce than what they're being paid for them. You know what I mean? Like they're losing money on them and destroying the land in the process.
I appreciate that your efforts exist, and I feel like I appreciate it a lot, and I'm glad that you're doing that work. But I try to think about what we can do ourselves, in terms of planting native things on our land, on our own lawns, instead of just grass.
You can edit out a lot of the stuff that I said about agriculture, but if you leave anything in, kill your lawn and plant natives, because the biggest reason for the biodiversity loss is habitat loss every single time. And every one of us has a little slice of something, even if it's just a balcony with some pots that we could grow native plants in, and every little bit would make a difference. I'm going to kill my lawn. I'm in the process of doing it, and I'm planting all native and then food producing plots as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, John, thank you for being on the show and telling me about your piece, Rest One, the Champaign-Urbana music scene and your experiences with it, and then also your favorite non-musical things. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thank you for listening to Champaign is Also a Band podcast. This is TwoLeggedZoo reminding you great music is out there. Go find it where you live.
That's a wrap.
Champaign is also a band.
You almost have an NPR voice. It's so good.
Studio South Beaker on the inside.
Kill your lawn and plant natives.